Greetings, NCOPE mentors and directors. It's Chris Robinson, Clinical Resource Director for NCOPE. Wanted to take a brief moment and show you how to identify if your combined O&P residents are documenting comparable numbers of exposures between orthotic and prosthetic clinical practice. There's a few ways that we can achieve this goal. First and foremost, let's go ahead and take advantage of the reports that already exist within NCOPE Tracker. Start by clicking on Active Residents. This will take a few moments to load depending on the number of residents you have and the amount of data that they've entered. Once this does load, we can go ahead and run a report for that individual resident. To run reports for an individual resident, simply click the paper airplane icon as you have always done for reports within NCOPE Tracker. And now we can go ahead and identify the specific report that we want to run. Let's start with an executive report. This is going to give you the basic information needed to answer the fundamental question of, is my resident seeing a comparable number of orthotic versus prosthetic encounters? It's going to prompt you for a start date and an end date. So let's go ahead now and identify a date range that we want to evaluate for our specific resident. And under Notes, you can enter whatever you'd like. The key is it should be relevant. I'm entering demo for NCOPE as we are going to be using a real NCOPE Residency Director's account and data set. And this will take a few moments to run, depending on the date range and the number of cases. But once the report is complete, In Progress will change into a small blue icon, as we can see here below. Now let's go ahead and download that report. And we can open up the file, and it'll be a very nice PDF. First and foremost, we can very clearly see orthotic and prosthetic interventions are split within the executive report. The columns on the left-hand side for each one of these major age groups are the orthotic encounters, and the columns on the right are the prosthetic encounters. So we can very clearly see in this case, not only is our resident seeing mostly adult and geriatric populations, which is reasonable given the unique populations at the clinic for this resident, but also we can see that the number of orthotic encounters is considerably greater for both the adult as well as the senior populations. Furthermore, we can go ahead now and scroll down and identify the volume of cases being seen for the required orthotic competencies, required experiences, and prosthetic competencies. And the key thing here is the scales will change depending on the number of records entered. So you notice we have different scales because at the end of the day, this resident that we're using for our demo saw a larger volume of orthotic cases. So we can see that 50 is the scale here for our orthotic competencies. 4 is the scale for lumbosacral orthoses and other orthotic required experiences. And prosthetic competencies, it's not quite to 50. They're not set the same. On that note, we can see the individual exposures for the devices and interventions provided as well. But the easiest way to figure out the volume of orthotic versus prosthetic cases, just look at the top by age group. You can very clearly see a much greater percentage of orthotic versus prosthetic cases. On that note, you'll recall that the minimum percentage spent in either discipline is 40% time spent. So whether you're doing a combined residency and they're only seeing 40% of their time towards prosthetic cases or 40% of their time towards orthotic cases, that's the minimum. But honestly, an ideal combined residency is going to have pretty close to 50-50 split. Let's go ahead now and take a look and see if we can delve a little bit deeper using some of the export functionality that exists within NCOPE Tracker as well. What I'm going to do now is go ahead and close the PDF that we were just viewing, and we're going to go ahead and use a new tool. Under Active Residents, there's a tool called Case Compliance. And when we click on it, it'll usually take a few moments to load because, again, depending on the volume of data that the resident has entered, it needs to query and extract all that data so that it can be manipulated and viewed by you, the residency director or mentor. But once it does load, you'll see that we have a nice colored chart here, and it will identify the months where cases were logged, and there's a small icon that looks like a download icon similar to what we had with the reports. But when you select the download icon, instead of downloading a PDF, it's going to download a file in a format that Microsoft Excel can manipulate. It usually loads up fairly quickly, and once we have that downloaded, I'm going to go ahead now and open up that Excel file. What we're going to do now is just tighten up the view a little bit so that we can more easily see the relevant columns, in particular the type of visits that we've been seeing, whether they're orthotic or prosthetic, as well as the body segments involved. So I'm going to click Enable Editing if it prompts you to do that. That's pretty common as you're downloading the file from the internet. And if you double click on the little dividers between the various columns, what it will do for you is automatically allow you to shrink them to the narrowest width available, or you can manually override it as I'm doing here. But now it's very easy to see whether we have orthotic versus prosthetic. And I'm going to even dial in our zoom a little bit to make it even easier for us to see on the screen. So what we're going to do now is ask a couple of unique questions. The first question I want to ask is, what's the relative number of orthotic versus prosthetic cases that we are seeing? What you can do is you can either highlight all the fields that are available, or on your keyboard you can hit the shortcut Control and A, and it'll select all of the cells that contain information. Now what I'm going to do at the very top is go to Data and Sort. And you'll see it has the option for my data has headers, which is true. It's going to have headers at the top. And I'm going to go ahead and sort by type. And we're going to do it alphabetically, so orthotic shows up before prosthetic. And we can very easily see now all of our orthotic cases are at the top and our prosthetic cases are at the bottom. And on the left-hand side, we can clearly see I'm in the 51st row, meaning that there were 50 orthotic cases entered during this period of time. As we know, there's a top row, row number 1, that's a header row. Alternatively, if you want to just make the counting easy, you can go ahead and just do a left click on your column of interest and drag your mouse down until you get to the last case that says orthotic. And you'll see count 50. And then we can select prosthetic and scroll down here and see that our count is at 28. Now keep in mind, it's not uncommon to have a slightly lower count for prosthetic versus orthotic interventions, even if you have a perfect 50-50 time split. The reason for that is the typical orthotic office visit is normally somewhat shorter than the typical prosthetic office visit. So don't necessarily panic, but keep in mind this is a really easy way for you to just see the total number of cases that have been logged. If you want to break it down on a time level, using your scheduling tools within your electronic medical records is usually the easiest way to get that information out. Now, what if we wanted to take that next step and figure out, gosh, what was the total number of days that our residents saw orthotic versus prosthetic cases? That's pretty easy to do. So we can see here, this is my bottom row of orthotic cases. And I'm just going to scroll all the way over to make sure that I pick all the columns. And I'm still on our 51st row. And now what I'm going to do is remove duplicates for the appointment date for the orthotic type. I'm going to click Remove Duplicates. It's underneath the Data tab here, which is already open. We're going to remove our duplicates and click Unselect All. And we're going to click on Appointment Date, like so. And now we can see, first of all, there's a bunch of blank rows because we removed anything that was a duplicate. And second of all, we can go ahead now and identify that there are 22 rows that contain data for orthotics, or 22 unique dates that actually orthotic patient encounters occurred. We can repeat this process again for our prosthetic encounters. I'm going to go ahead now and select all of our appropriate rows for our prosthetic encounters. We're going to go to remove duplicates. And you might be thinking, gosh, which one was the date again? I don't quite remember. You can always click on my data has headers and it'll actually give you a little preview of the column that, ooh, that looks like the date. So it's the third option here. So I'm going to unselect all and choose column C, which is my third option. And now we can very clearly see we've gone ahead and removed any duplicates. And if we take a look at our count, our resident saw prosthetic cases on 16 unique days. Anyway, I hope that's a helpful way for you to determine the number of days that your resident was actually seeing prosthetic cases, as well as the total number of prosthetic versus orthotic counters using both our executive reports tool as well as Microsoft Excel and some really quick data sorting. This is Chris, signing out.